Story 1. The Unseen Watcher in the Blackout. It was a sweltering July night in 2018. The kind of oppressive heat that makes the air feel thick and unbreathable. I was alone in my apartment, a small 2-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of an old building in the city's historic district. My name is Alex, and I was trying to escape the heat by binge-watching a show. The hum of the air conditioner, a constant, comforting drone. The clock on my phone read 1:17 a.m. Suddenly, the world plunged into absolute darkness. The air conditioner died, the television screen went black, and the digital clock on the microwave vanished. The city outside, usually a symphony of distant sirens and traffic, fell silent. It was an unnerving, profound quiet, broken only by the rapid thumping of my own heart. Power outages weren't unheard of, especially during summer storms, but this was different. There was no distant flicker of lights, no sound of generators kicking in. Just a suffocating, all-encompassing void. I fumbled for my phone, its screen, a blinding beacon in the sudden gloom. No signal, no Wi-Fi, nothing. It was a useless brick. I found my emergency flashlight, its beam cutting a shaky path through the oppressive black. I walked to the window, peering out. The entire city block was dark. No streetlights, no glow from any window. It was as if our small section of the metropolis had been excised from existence, a forgotten island in a sea of darkness. The silence outside was the most disturbing part. Even in a blackout, you'd expect to hear something distant, car alarms, the murmur of neighbors, the general hum of a city that never truly sleeps. But there was nothing. Just an unnatural, heavy quiet that seemed to press down on me, making it difficult to breathe. A cold dread began to creep up my spine. This wasn't just a power outage. This felt deliberate. I decided to check on Mrs. Gable, my elderly neighbor, across the hall. She lived alone and was prone to anxiety. I grabbed a heavy mag light, its weight a small comfort, in my trembling hand, and stepped out into the hallway. The air was still, heavy, and strangely cold despite the summer heat. The darkness was absolute, a thick blanket that seemed to absorb all light. I could barely see my hand in front of my face, relying on memory and the faint outline of the door frames. As I approached Mrs. Gable's apartment, I noticed something even more unsettling. Her door, usually securely locked, was ajar. A sliver of inky blackness yawned open, inviting me into the void. A wave of apprehension washed over me, but concern for Mrs. Gable pushed me forward. I pushed the door open slowly, the beam dancing across the familiar entryway. Everything was in its place, neat and orderly, just as she always kept it. But the silence inside was even more profound than outside. It was a silence that felt expectant, like the apartment was holding its breath. I called out her name. "Mrs. Gable, are you home?" My voice sounded thin, swallowed by the darkness. I walked through the living room, the beam of my mag light illuminating familiar furniture, framed photographs, delicate porcelain figurines. Everything was normal, yet profoundly wrong. The air was stagnant, heavy, as if no one had breathed it in hours. I checked the kitchen, the dining room, empty. Then I went to her bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open slowly. The bed was neatly made. Her nightstand held a book, a glass of water, and a pair of reading glasses. It was as if she had just stepped out for a moment, but she wasn't there. And the silence. The silence was deafening. It felt like a presence, a heavy, unseen weight pressing down on me, making the hairs on my arms stand on end. I was about to leave when I noticed something on her dresser, a small antique locket. It was open, and a faint, almost imperceptible melody seemed to emanate from it, a tinny, distorted lullaby. I leaned closer, my heart pounding. The locket was not playing. It was completely still. Yet, the melody was there, a ghostly echo in the profound silence. It was barely audible, a whisper of sound that seemed to come from inside my own head, a chilling, melancholic tune. I backed away slowly, my mag light beam trembling. The silence outside was no longer just the absence of sound. It was a living, breathing entity, a predator waiting in the dark. I stumbled out of Mrs. Gable's apartment, pulling the door shut behind me, the sound of the latch clicking unnaturally loud in the oppressive quiet. I ran back to my apartment, fumbling with my keys, locking the door behind me, every shadow a potential threat, every creak of the old building a phantom footstep. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my living room, the mag light clutched in my hand, its beam pointed at the ceiling, creating a small, flickering circle of light in the vast darkness. Hours crawled by. The air grew colder, despite the summer night. I could feel the hairs on my arms standing on end. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. A massive EMP, a localized atmospheric anomaly. But none of it made sense. The silence was too complete, too absolute. It felt ancient, primal, as if the world had reverted to a state before sound, before life. I started to hear things then, or thought I did. Faint whispers, just at the edge of my hearing, like 1,000 tiny voices murmuring in unison. They weren't distinct words, just a low, continuous hum, a collective sigh, that seemed to emanate from the very fabric of the darkness. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block it out, but it only intensified, seeping into my mind, filling my thoughts with a creeping dread. Then, the temperature dropped even further. I could see my breath in the air. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I could almost make out individual voices, speaking in a language I didn't understand, yet somehow I felt their meaning. They spoke of emptiness, of forgotten places, of things that had been waiting in the dark for a very long time. It was a chorus of despair, a symphony of forgotten souls, a chilling lament that resonated deep within my bones. I remember looking out the window, through a tiny gap in the curtains. The moon, usually a bright orb in the night sky, was gone. The stars were gone. The sky was a vast, inky blackness, devoid of any light. It was as if the entire universe had been extinguished, leaving only this profound, suffocating void. And in that void, I felt a presence. Not a physical presence, but something vast, immense, something that was watching, waiting, observing, its unseen gaze piercing through the darkness, settling on me. The power returned just before dawn, a sudden, jarring jolt of light and sound. The air conditioner hummed back to life, the streetlights flickered on, and the distant sounds of the city slowly returned. I collapsed onto my couch, trembling, the memory of the profound silence and the ghostly lullaby etched into my mind. I called Mrs. Gable later that morning. Her phone rang, and she answered, her voice cheerful and normal. "Oh, Alex, good morning. Did you feel that little power flicker last night?" "Nothing too bad, thankfully." I asked her if she had been home. She said she had been asleep in her bed. I asked her about the locket. She said it hadn't been touched in years. I didn't tell her about the silence, about the ghostly melody, about the profound sense of dread. She wouldn't have understood, but I knew. I knew that for a few terrifying hours, my quiet apartment building had been swallowed by something, ancient and cold, something that thrived in the absolute absence of light and sound. And sometimes, late at night, when the power flickers, I still hear that faint, distorted lullaby. A chilling reminder, oft silence, that once enveloped my world, and the unseen horrors that lurk just beyond the edge of our perception. Story 2. The Voices from the Grid. It was a frigid December night in 2021. A sudden, unexpected blizzard had swept through the region, blanketing everything in a thick layer of snow and ice. I was Maria, a freelance graphic designer, and I was working late, trying to meet a deadline, when the lights flickered and died. My small, detached house, usually a beacon of warmth and light, was plunged into a biting, echoing darkness. My phone was dead, the internet was down, and the silence was broken only by the relentless howl of the wind and the occasional creak of the old house settling under the weight of the snow. I was huddled under a pile of blankets, trying to stay warm, when I started hearing them. Voices, faint at first, like whispers carried on the wind, but slowly growing clearer. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing through the darkened rooms of my house. I strained my ears, trying to make sense of them. They weren't distinct words, more like a jumble of overlapping conversations, a cacophony of murmurs and hushed tones, a strange, disjointed symphony of human speech. I tried to rationalize it. The wind, perhaps, whistling through a loose window pane, or maybe the old pipes, groaning under the strain of the cold. But the voices were too distinct, too human. I heard laughter, then a sob, a sharp, angry retort, followed by a pleading whisper. It was like listening to a dozen different conversations happening simultaneously, all just beyond the edge of my comprehension, yet strangely compelling, drawing me in. I grabbed my emergency lantern, its weak glow casting long, dancing shadows. I crept to the living room window, pressing my ear against the cold glass. The voices were louder now, just outside my house, as if a crowd had gathered in the snow-covered yard. I heard footsteps, shuffling, dragging. And then, a distinct, chilling sound, a low, guttural growl, followed by a sharp, wet, tearing sound. My blood ran cold. This wasn't the wind. This wasn't the pipes. This was something else entirely. I backed away from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs. I tried to think, what could it be? My neighbors. But why would they be having such strange, unsettling conversations, in the dark, in a blizzard? And that growl, it sounded animalistic, primal. I pressed myself against the wall, listening, my breath held captive in my lungs. The voices continued, a relentless, disorienting chorus. They seemed to swirl around my house, seeping through the walls, through the floor, through the ceiling, a pervasive, inescapable presence. Then, a new sound emerged, a scratching, faint at first, then growing louder, more insistent. It seemed to be coming from inside my house. I spun around, shining my lantern wildly around the room. Nothing. The scratching continued, a rhythmic scraping sound, like claws on wood, or perhaps, something far more sinister. It was coming from the attic access panel in the ceiling. My attic, the one I hadn't opened in years. I stood frozen, paralyzed by fear. The voices outside intensified, a swirling vortex of sound, a maddening chorus that threatened to overwhelm my senses. The scratching grew louder, more frantic. I could hear something moving inside the attic, something heavy, something dragging itself across the floor, directly above my head. I wanted to scream, but no sound escaped my throat. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. A squirrel, a raccoon, but the sounds were too large, too deliberate, too human. Suddenly, the scratching stopped. The voices outside faded, replaced by a profound, echoing silence. I stood there, trembling, my lantern beam shaking uncontrollably. Then, a low, raspy whisper, right next to my ear, so close I could feel the cold breath on my skin. "We're here, Maria," I screamed. A raw, primal scream that tore through the silence, echoing through the darkened house. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet, falling to the floor. My lantern clattered away, plunging the room back into absolute darkness. I scrambled to my feet, blindly fumbling for the door, desperate to escape. I threw it open, bursting into the yard, my eyes wide with terror. The yard was empty. No crowd, no shuffling footsteps, no growling, just the swirling snow and the relentless wind. I stood there, panting, my mind reeling. Had I imagined it all? The voices, the scratching, the whisper, but the fear was too real, too visceral. I stumbled back into my house, slammed the door shut, and barricaded it with everything I could find, every piece of furniture, every heavy object. The power returned with a sudden, blinding flash, followed by the familiar hum of electricity. The lights flickered on, revealing my disheveled house, the overturned furniture, the scattered blankets. I stood there, trembling. The memory of the voices, the scratching, and that chilling whisper burned into my mind. I never told anyone what happened that night. They wouldn't have believed me. They would have said it was the isolation, the cold, the fear playing tricks on my mind, a byproduct of the blizzard. But I knew that for a few terrifying hours, in the absolute darkness of a power outage, I had not been alone. Something had been there, something that whispered my name, something that scratched at my attic door, something that thrived in the absence of light and sound, something that had seeped in from the very fabric of the electrical grid itself. And sometimes, when the lights flicker, or the wind howls outside, I still hear those faint, overlapping voices, a chilling reminder of the night I was trapped with the unseen, the unheard, the things that lurk just beyond the edge of our perception. Story 3. The Shadow and the Static. It was a crisp October evening in 2022. My friends and I had rented a remote cabin in the Appalachian Mountains for a weekend getaway. Miles from the nearest town, a place designed for disconnecting from the digital world. The idea was to escape the constant noise of the city, to immerse ourselves in nature. My name is Chris, and I was with my 3 closest friends, Mike, Lisa, and Ben. The cabin was rustic, charming, nestled deep within a dense forest. The only sounds were the rustling leaves and the distant hoot of an owl, a symphony of natural tranquility. Our first night was perfect. We cooked dinner over a roaring fire, told ghost stories, and laughed until our sides hurt. The next morning, a sudden, violent storm rolled in. The wind howled, rain lashed against the windows, and the trees swayed ominously. And then, inevitably, the power went out. The cabin was plunged into darkness, save for the flickering light of the fireplace. We lit candles, pulled out board games, and tried to make the best of it. It was cozy, almost idyllic at first, a perfect setting for a rustic retreat. As the hours passed, and the storm showed no signs of abating, a subtle shift occurred. The coziness began to morph into isolation. The flickering shadows cast by the candles seemed to dance with a life of their own, transforming familiar objects into grotesque shapes. The wind outside sounded less like a storm and more like a mournful wail, a lament carried on the cold air. We started to get on each other's nerves, small arguments flaring up over trivial things. The forced intimacy of the darkness began to fray our nerves, revealing the raw edges of our personalities. I was in the kitchen, trying to find some more firewood, when I saw it. A shadow. Not a shadow cast by the fire, but a deeper, darker shadow, clinging to the wall in the corner of the room. It was too distinct, too solid to be a trick of the light. It was shaped like a human figure, tall and slender, but it seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, a void in the already profound darkness. I blinked, and it was gone. I shook my head, dismissing it as a trick of my tired eyes, a figment of my imagination, fueled by the isolation and the darkness, a product of my own frayed nerves. But then, I saw it again. In the hallway, just for a fleeting moment, a dark, elongated shape darting from one patch of shadow to another. My heart began to pound. I didn't say anything to my friends. I didn't want to sound crazy, to break the fragile peace that still existed between us. But I started to watch, to scan the periphery of my vision, searching for the elusive shadow. My senses heightened, every nerve on edge. It became a game, a terrifying, silent game. The shadow would appear and disappear, always just out of direct sight, always in the darkest corners of the cabin. It never made a sound. It never seemed to move with any discernible pattern. It was just there, a silent, watchful presence, a blot on the canvas of our forced isolation, a constant, unsettling reminder that we were not alone. My friends, oblivious, continued their board game, their laughter echoing unnaturally loud in the oppressive quiet, a stark contrast to the growing dread within me. As night fell, the storm intensified. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the windows, threatening to tear the roof off the cabin. The candles flickered wildly, casting grotesque, dancing shadows that seemed to mock my sanity, to twist reality into something unrecognizable. I was on edge, every nerve screaming, my eyes darting from one dark corner to another, searching for the shadow. I felt its presence, a cold, heavy weight in the room, even when I couldn't see it. A palpable chill that seeped into my bones. Then, Mike screamed. A short, sharp, guttural sound that was abruptly cut off, swallowed by the howling wind. We all froze. The board game pieces scattered across the table, a chaotic mess. "Mike," Lisa whispered, her voice trembling, barely audible above the storm. No answer. We grabbed our flashlights, their weak beams cutting through the oppressive darkness. We found him in the corner of the living room, slumped against the wall, his eyes wide with terror, his mouth agape in a silent scream. There was no visible injury, no sign of struggle. He was just gone. His eyes were fixed on the corner, where I had first seen the shadow, a silent testament to the horror he had witnessed. Lisa started to cry, a low guttural sob that tore through the silence. Ben, usually the most composed of us, was pale, his hands shaking uncontrollably. I knew, we all knew, it wasn't the storm, it wasn't the isolation, it was the shadow. It had finally revealed itself, and it had taken Mike, leaving behind only a shell of the man he once was. We spent the rest of the night, huddled together, our flashlights pointed at the darkest corners of the room, our eyes wide with terror. Every shadow a potential threat. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind, sent a jolt of fear through us. We saw it then, too. The shadow. It was larger now, more defined, a towering, silent figure that seemed to fill the room. Its form shifting and swirling in the flickering candlelight, a monstrous entity that defied all logic and reason. It never moved towards us directly. It just watched, a silent, patient predator, waiting for its next victim, its unseen gaze burning into our very souls. The storm finally broke just before dawn. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the heavy clouds, illuminating the cabin. The shadow was gone. We stumbled out of the cabin, leaving everything behind, not caring about our belongings, only about escaping the pervasive dread that clung to the very air. We ran through the muddy forest, not stopping until we reached the nearest town, where we found a working phone and called for help, our voices hoarse from screaming, our bodies trembling with residual fear. The police investigated. They found Mike's body, still slumped against the wall, his eyes wide with terror. The official cause of death was listed as a heart attack, brought on by extreme stress. They found no evidence of foul play, no signs of a struggle. They dismissed our story of the shadow as a hallucination, a collective delusion brought on by fear and isolation. A convenient explanation for something they couldn't comprehend. But we knew what we had seen. We knew what had taken Mike, what had seeped into our reality during the profound darkness of the power outage. To this day, I can't stand the dark. Every power outage, every flickering light, sends me into a cold sweat. I see the shadow in the corner of my eye, a fleeting glimpse of a deeper darkness, a reminder of the malevolent presence that once stalked us. And sometimes, when the wind howls, I hear Mike's silent scream, a chilling reminder of the night we were trapped with an unseen entity, a silent predator that thrived in the absolute absence of light and sound. The power outage wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a portal, a momentary tear in the fabric of reality that allowed something ancient and malevolent to step through, leaving behind only fear and echoing unexplained death. The static on the radio, the sudden silence of the forest, the flickering candlelight, they were all part of a larger, more terrifying picture. A glimpse into a world where the lines between reality and nightmare blurred, leaving us forever changed by the darkness that had consumed us. Asterisk.